it has been 5 days since this insurrection. There's been a bunch of conversations in the Democratic Party amongst a few Republicans about how to move forward. How did they settle on this plan that I've described?
The short answer is that 2020 amendment did not, Pelosi was hoping that Mike instituted it himself. That did not happen. So that was one thing. And it seems like right now it's just hard to imagine that a lot of Republicans in the House and more Republicans in the Senate are probably not going to support impeachment. So we're now at a point where it looks like the impeachment votes are going to be symbolic. The criticism of the president is unlikely to be pushed out. I think last time they suggest neither the cabinet nor the Senate Republicans are going to actually support removing Trump from office. So now we're having votes that are basically the Democrats themselves are to some extent saying we are mad, we think Trump has done bad things, but it looks like these votes are not going to have the action of actually getting him out of office, which I think is a threat. The way he has behaved, leaving in office isn't a threat, but the votes are not there. And I do think it's worth noting that it looks like Pelosi in some ways, the action on Wednesday, we're going to have a vote basically the next Wednesday, a week later. This is a real urgency she could have pushed forward. And in my view, this is another instance where Pelosi sort of wanted to get the Republicans to take on Trump as opposed to doing it herself, and we saw a lot of over these last 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear that Mike Pence wouldn't invoke the 25th Amendment, and there are very much why he should have based in why the 25th Amendment was created to begin with. Why are they even taking this route of waiting the 24 hours for this resolution? Why not just jump to impeachment today?
I was saying, I'm not going to point this resolution today and tomorrow to get Mike Pence to do something he's clearly not going to do feels like a fruitless sort of waste of time, and I'm not sure there's any real good procedural arguments for this beyond wanting to get Republicans on the record and wanting to embarrass and shame Mike Pence more and the cabinet. The political benefit of Democrats, the Republicans are going to pro-Trump vote 3 times. They're objecting to the resolution on Monday. They're objecting again on Tuesday. They're going to end up voting against impeachment. So you shame the Republicans more against your Pelosi. But I think the American people that will turn on do the Republicans cast 3 votes that make them look bad, but is a dangerous president moved out of office. The resolution process seems to do nothing to have more political votes going on.
Amelia, what is the point of the 25th Amendment that we discussed so much at this point?
I think this is one of the complicated features of this whole debate is that it's not really clear, and I think you can make a pretty good argument that this is not really what the 25th Amendment was intended for. Basically, the goal of the 25th Amendment is to create a mechanism for the vice president to take over if the president is incapacitated due to disability. And a helpful example of this might be the 25th Amendment passed in the 1960s, and let's say that when JFK was shot, that he died, he was in some sort of incapacitated state and couldn't actively pass on power to the vice president. And so the concern is, okay, we want to make sure that if there's a situation, God forbid, that the president is really incapacitated and also incapacitated to the point where they are unable to actually pass power onto the vice president, that there is a mechanism for doing that. It's not really clear, and I've talked to some legal analysts and read some reports indicating that it wasn't intended to deal with a president who is not necessarily incapacitated, is just dangerous, failing in various ways in his role as president. So, I understand the political appeal of the 25th Amendment for someone like Pelosi, and certainly in the Democrats' perspective, and also just in the political realities of what's happening with impeachment now that Harry was playing out, it would certainly be much neater for the Democrats if they could get Trump's own administration to be the one to get him to leave office in this critical period before Biden takes over. But it's not clear that the 25th Amendment is really the mechanism that is supposed to do that.
To say this more bluntly, we have a very well lined out process in the Constitution called impeachment removal, and that should be the preferred outcome, I would argue, over a 20th Amendment, which is not intended to be used as a way to remove a president that we don't like, who we think makes bad decisions. It would make more sense to use the actual process described, written by the founders, as opposed to this sort of backdoor method. And it's like galling to see the preferred method to be. I know it's faster, but it would be much better for the country, I would argue, to have the members elected by the Congress. Most people don't know who is in Trump's cabinet. No one voted for them. So the idea that they should move the president as opposed to the sitting Congress is not a good precedent.
But also this idea that the 25th Amendment is faster, maybe it's a little bit faster just because of the slowness with which Congress moves, but what we saw last year with Trump's impeachment and trial that happened over a period of months, Congress doesn't have to do that. Congress has set the rules, and if Congress wanted to, they could do this very quickly. So, this goes back to the point that Harry was making that, when you were asking about sort of like, what's the purpose of this delay? It's not like it's procedurally necessary. There's a political choice being made to push this process along at the speed that it's happening, and there's an argument that's being made that the 2020 Amendment is faster. That's a little disingenuous. Like, Pelosi could act faster if she wanted to.
Okay, so there are a couple different pieces here, which is why the Democrats are deciding to take the route that they're taking and what the timeline looks for that likely impeachment. It seems the vast majority of Democrats in the House at this point have signed on. And then also how Republicans are responding to impeachment itself, but also to the president's behavior more broadly beyond just the question of whether or not they will impeach and convict him. So it doesn't seem like Mike Pence is going to invoke the 25th Amendment. You've also made legal constitutional arguments for why that wouldn't make sense anyway. Beyond Mike Pence, how are Republicans reacting to the idea of impeachment and conviction?
Just go briefly. The cabinet members who might be inclined to vote to remove Trump, they're quitting instead. So Betsy DeVos and Elaine Chao quit last week, so that vote is even more purposeless now. I don't think Mike Pompeo or a bunch of Trump's loyalists are going to vote out without the president. In terms of Congress, I think in terms of members who have said unequivocally they will vote for impeachment and removal of the president, I think we're talking about Adam Kinzinger here, House of Illinois. House Republicans don't matter that much, but in terms of like who would actually vote for impeachment in the House and join the Democrats, I think we're at a very small number of Republicans. In the Senate, it sounds like Pat Toomey, Ben Sasse, maybe Susan Collins, probably Mitt Romney. You probably need 17 or 18 Republican votes for removal. I think we're talking about we're at 4 or 5 right now. So I don't think the numbers are maybe a House vote list, but you're hearing two arguments from Republicans. The first one is basically sort of a logistics one that doesn't address the fact that Trump is leaving office in 10 days anyway. We should just let him go out of office. He can't do anything that badly, which I disagree with. He did a lot of bad, but there's other arguing he can't do that much bad in the last 2 weeks or 10 days. The second argument, which is even less convincing, is that being made by sort of Marco Rubio and others, is that impeachment would be too divisive for the country. I mean, that seems absurd. Like the insurrection to the president encouraged a divisive act. Moving out the president would be obviously be controversial, but it wouldn't be divisive if the Republicans all voted for it, which they can do. So they're sort of like saying division that are causing means that can't go forward. But in reality, even if I find these arguments to be fairly unconvincing and disingenuous, which is the second one, the Republicans are not showing a lot of information to support the president's approval. There's been some polls of voters, and it looks like a quarter of Republican voters support removing the president, but not anywhere near a majority. And so you're probably seeing a little bit of the core activists who are probably reaching out to members of Congress. My assumption is are probably more inclined to be against Trump's removal than being for Trump's removal.
This is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem here that I don't know that we can answer on this podcast, but if Republicans all decided en masse in Congress that they did want to remove President Trump from office, would that in itself shift Republican opinion? Or is Trump the only person who has control over a Republican opinion?
So, one of the most important questions I think we have about this part of the world's history is, could the Republican Party have reined in the official Republican Party, members of Congress, the establishment have reined in Trump more if they had acted early, or is Trump control the base? And I think the answer is not really clear. It looks like from the polling, the big block of Republican voters are very uncomfortable with this. And I tend to think that group would grow to some extent if Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, Nikki Haley gave a joint statement saying this is unacceptable. I think that number could grow. But I do think there's probably a core Trump base that might be 40% of the Republican Party or so that would not go with them. So the answer is I'm not sure. I think that there is a core Trump base, but I don't think it's like the overwhelming majority of the Republican Party. I think it's a block, and I think a unified Republican statement from Thursday where all Republican leaders on Thursday said Trump must go would have moved Republican opinion, but those people didn't want to do that.
So beyond the question of impeachment itself, which relies on members of the House and senators, how are Republicans reacting? So not necessarily on whether or not he should be impeached, whether or not he should be convicted and removed. What are Republicans doing? I mean, this is like this huge event in American history, and if they're not encouraging the president to be removed from office, what are they saying?
Well, that was like the initial reaction from a lot of Republicans after the events of last week. It was kind of like call off your goons and stop these people from continuing with this insurrection, which President Trump then followed up with a statement that started with, well, we all know the election was stolen, but you gotta go home, which, like, obviously, like, if you are continuing to insist that the election was stolen and there are people who are rioting in the Capitol because of it, like, that's not going to happen. So that was, like, a pretty predictable and extremely weak tea response. And then you've seen just sort of, like, you know, a variety of actions that are condemning what happened, but saying, you know, we have to move on in the name of unity, and, like, you know, look, it's really the Democrats who are pushing this divisiveness by trying to push for impeachment, and, like, we really need to get to a point where the country can heal, and the way to do that is not by trying to insist on accountability for the president, and as Perry was saying, like, get him out of office in a time when he could still be quite dangerous.
Has there been a break with him? Like, have people disavowed Trump even if they're not calling for his removal?
I mean, I don't know what a break with him looks like right now if it's not supporting him no longer being in office. We have people like Betsy DeVos and Elaine Chao who resigned from the cabinet, and they're like, okay, this is a bridge too far. I can't be in this cabinet anymore. But they have served under Trump for the past 4 years. You know, there have been plenty of things that have pointed to something like this happening, and Trump has done plenty of things that are not inciting an insurrection, but, like, leading to this point. And so, you know, to say, like, oh, I can't serve in this administration anymore, oh, this president has gone too far, is a question of what a break looks like. I don't know what that is at this point, given that the choice is basically, do you let him stay in office for the remainder of his term, or do you say, oh, you know, he can't really do that much damage, it's better for the country to just let him serve out his term and leave, and then Biden will take over, and then we can move on from there.
So Nikki Haley said in the last few days, Trump's post-election actions will be, quote, judged harshly by his history. I think that's what we're talking about here. Like, that's my sense, is the people who distance themselves with Trump will use his name and say Donald Trump did bad things in this post-election period. I'm guessing the Republican Party is not going to ever disavow his actions in the most of his first 4 years, but my sense is there will be Republicans who will say directly what Donald Trump said and did led to what happened in the Capitol, and then you'll get a lot of Republicans who will suggest there was a mob, and some people were with Antifa, and sort of other things that suggest what happened on Wednesday had nothing to do with Trump, or very little. And I think that's the core difference that we're going to see. Disavow Trump is going to look like what Nikki Haley said, and I think you'll see a fair amount of people do that, even if they don't necessarily vote for removal. And then really outside, there are plenty of Republicans outside of Congress who don't have a vote on this, and my guess is those people will also divide in those two camps of who blames Trump for Wednesday and who doesn't.
What does Mitch McConnell say?
his wife did resign from the cabinet, so I think he's sort of trying to hint that he's in both camps. I don't think he's directly said Wednesday was because of Donald Trump, but I think he's tried to play both sides of this while some of his staffers have been hinting that Trump caused this. So I think it's like, does Mitch McConnell ever get to the point of disavowing Trump's, I think he might. He hasn't done so yet, is my impression. His comments have been more circumspect. He's not in the zone of like the Republicans who are not at all criticizing Donald Trump either.
And the other thing that I just add is that for Republicans, this debate over impeachment, it's not just about whether to remove Trump from office. Obviously, it could have the effect of doing that, but also there is this option as part of an impeachment trial that Congress can bar him from holding further federal office. And so obviously we're heading into uncharted territory here. Trump would be the first president to be impeached twice, much less to see an impeachment trial potentially continue after he's no longer president. But that is another option, even if the trial happens and it doesn't finish or even start until Trump has left the White House. There is this other step that they can say, okay, he's not in the White House anymore, but he really needs to not be president again. He needs to not be able to run in 2024. And so I think the Democrats are likely thinking about that and will try to, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more pushing on that.
So let's dig in a little bit to that timeline, because for Republicans who are saying, I condemn Trump's actions, but impeachment is divisive, part of their argument is that, well, he couldn't be removed from office before January 20th anyway, unless all 100 of the senators decided to begin the trial immediately as soon as they received the impeachment articles from the House. So that means one Republican says no, and it's therefore not possible to remove the president before the 2020. So how are Democrats thinking about this process, given that conundrum? Are they going to try to fast track the articles of impeachment and pressure 100 senators to begin the trial immediately, and I guess pretend that that is a possibility, withhold the articles of impeachment until Trump has left office, therefore maybe slightly acting counter to what they say their claim is, which is to remove the president as soon as possible? What happens here?
So the interesting thing is happening where McConnell's, there was a story in the Washington Post where people close to McConnell sort of floated the idea. Remember, McConnell is the majority leader and controls the Senate until January 20th, is my understanding, until Kamala Harris is sworn in. So McConnell's allies floated the idea that they couldn't, because of the Senate calendar and other things, they could change if they wanted to. But they floated the idea that an impeachment trial could not start until January 19th. And therefore, an impeachment trial would therefore extend at least beyond that. And what they're hinting is, of course, that an impeachment trial, the Republicans are threatening essentially that an impeachment trial will go into the first 10 days and 2 weeks of the Biden administration. And now you're seeing Biden aides are sort of anonymously telling reporters, we're nervous about impeachment because we don't want impeachment to get away in the way of our first couple weeks of governing. So now you've got basically a situation where Republicans are hinting, if you're going to do this, we're going to have a real impeachment then. We're going to slow walk it as much as possible. Biden is therefore like, I don't want this getting in the way of my first couple weeks as president. So I think Clyburn has suggested that we should send the articles of impeachment up, but maybe like in March or something. This all seems a little bit convoluted because a lot of sort of like legislative gamesmanship being played here, because at the end of the day, nobody thinks that Trump's going to be removed. So everybody's trying to figure out what is the timing best for placating my individual political needs.
Is it possible, Amelia, to convict a president who's no longer in office?
Again, this is a bit of an open question because it hasn't happened, but the consensus that I've seen from the legal experts who study impeachment is, there's nothing really to say that the president can no longer be held accountable for impeachable offenses once he's no longer in the White House. And the fact that there are other mechanisms beyond removal for holding the president accountable suggests that, this is something that the president doesn't immediately get out of impeachment free card as soon as he vacates the White House.
I've seen some questions as to whether it would be possible for the Senate to bar President Trump from ever holding federal office again without actually convicting him. And that question has to do with the fact that you could bar him from holding public office based on a simple majority, so 51 votes, whereas conviction would actually take 66 or, 2/3 of the Senate. What kind of legal opinions have you seen on whether or not you could enact a repercussion without the conviction?
Basically, the consensus I've seen is that you do have to do the conviction vote first, and so that would need to happen even if Trump was no longer president, and then you could do the 51 vote barring from holding federal office. Obviously, from the Democrats' perspective, it would be much easier to accomplish the goal of barring Trump from holding federal office if they only needed a simple majority. But there may be a little bit of diversity of legal opinion about this, just because that is inevitably the case in these uncharted territory situations. But most of the legal experts, at least that I've talked to and I've seen write and report on this, seem to assume that it's 2/3 vote to convict, and then you can go down the path of, okay, should this person be barred from holding federal office?
Some of the polling I've seen on this, and of course, we've had 5 days for the public to digest what happened and tell pollsters what they think. But it's somewhere between 70 and 75% of registered voters oppose the storming of the Capitol, with around 60% saying that it's a threat to democracy and perpetrated by domestic terrorists. So there's pretty overwhelming condemnation, although not universal at all, condemnation of what happened. I've also seen polling that around 55% of Americans think that the president should be removed. So that gives us a little bit of the lay of the land. Is it a political liability for Republicans if they do not move to impeach the president, or I don't know what other options they have, but say it even happens after he leaves office, if they don't convict him either, does that...
Our own personal access to the events in our own minds is very limited and very poor. We get an edited and metaphoricalized version of what's going on in our brain.
So let's talk a bit about consciousness. It's a subject that many of us find fascinating.
Guys, put 2020 in the rearview mirror, start fresh, and lose the weight with Nutrisystem for Men.
Everything's planned out. welcome to Conversations with Coleman. Today my guest is Annika Harris. Annika is an author, an editor, consultant for science writers, the author of the children's book I Wonder, and a collaborator on Susan Kaiser Greenland's Mindful Games activity cards. Today we're talking about her book, Conscious, A Brief Guide to the Fundamental Mystery of Mind. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So,
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Tell me how you got interested in the subject of consciousness.
It goes back pretty far, actually. I really have been interested in it as a phenomenon for as long as I can remember. I've been talking more recently a little bit about when I first realized that there was something interesting and mysterious about the fact that we're having an experience, and that. And this is at a very young age. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and this first came in the context of severe migraines that I was suffering from. And there were a couple of times where the migraine went on for long enough that I was just kind of stuck in a very still position, because any little movement would cause the migraine to be much more painful. For a long stretch of time, I actually don't know, but it was probably at least an hour, if not closer to 2. And other people, I have now spoken with other people who've had a similar experience in pain, and I think especially children. There's something, I think, more flexible about children's minds and brains, and when they're experiencing pain, I think there are just a variety of ways that they start searching for coping. And I discovered, I became curious naturally because I was stuck there, about what this experience of pain actually was. And I think I did just naturally become curious, and then I realized that becoming curious about it stopped this stance that I had of resisting it, this kind of like psychological stance of resisting it, which just gave me the tiniest bit of relief. And when you're in that much pain, any move in either direction of more pain or less is pretty significant. And so that realization, I feel like, for me, was the beginning of my getting curious about experience in general, and how the moment-to-moment experience is different from what we generally assume, or there's a lot missing in our day-to-day experience.
So it sounds like you discovered mindfulness meditation on your own as a child.
Yes, and I think that's actually not so uncommon.
Well, I mean, yes, someone had to discover it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and presumably people have been discovering it all over the world for thousands of years.
Yes.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and in my volunteer work, I teach meditation to children, and that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to, is realizing that I couldn't have possibly been the only one who came across this type of technique as a child, and that children are really available to learning that skill.
So I didn't think we were going to talk about this first, but after having that initial experience of, for a moment, being mindful, realizing that your pain could be attenuated by paying attention to it, did you go deeper into that? Did you try to replicate that other times you were in pain as a child?
Yes, and actually I then realized that it was applicable to psychological pain as well. And that's the one place I'm sure there are times I use it that I just don't remember, but my strong memories are of being in difficult situations where I was very anxious, where something difficult was happening in my childhood, where I realized I could apply that same way of approaching it. And even I kind of had my own version of meditation. It would have been incredible to have actually been taught it as a skill by an adult, which is why I'm such a big proponent of this, because I was just kind of figuring it out on my own. But yes, no, I quickly realized that strategy could be applied to any kind of discomfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to how meditation links up with consciousness in general, but let's get to some basic definitions here.
Yeah.
Consciousness, that word is used in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
It's used in a political sense sometimes, consciousness raising.
Yes.
Let's narrow down what we're talking about here. What is consciousness?
Yeah. So the way I use the term and what I'm talking about in the book is consciousness in the most fundamental sense. So I think the best synonym is experience. Whether there's an experience present, and it doesn't have to be complex thought. It doesn't have to be, if very simple creatures like worms or flies or bees are conscious, we don't expect them to be having thoughts and plans and writing books. Compared to our experience, it's very minimal. But whether there's an experience present at all, and this connects to what the mystery of consciousness is, which is really the focus of the book. Kind of defining consciousness as in this very fundamental sense of just experience in whatever form it's present. It's in contrast to the way we see the universe, which we assume most of which is non-conscious. So, we look out at the stars and the earth and, the universe is filled with this non-conscious material and these atoms. And at some point, these atoms get configured in such a way that it becomes, there's something that it's like to be that collection of atoms or that system or that brain. And so I was just referencing Thomas Nagel's description of consciousness, and he says in his famous essay, "What is it like to be a bat?" He says, an organism is conscious if there is something that it is like to be that organism, and that's really what I'm talking about in the book and how I'm using the word conscious.
Yeah. For many people, I think they'll intuitively grasp why it's mysterious that the guitar hanging on the wall over there is not conscious, or so we think. We'll get there.
Right.
And that I am conscious, and that
Right.
I assume by analogy that you're conscious. Mm-hmm. Many people, I think, will understand at a gut level why that's somewhat mysterious. If we're both made of atoms, we're made of the same building blocks as the guitar. But I think some people won't. They'll think, well, yeah, there's something it's like to be me. There's nothing it's like to be a rock. That's just the way things are.
I think that's how most people see it, actually.
Yeah.
I think it takes a little bit of work for someone to get to why consciousness is so mysterious.
That's right.
Yeah.
In the book, you talk about one of the problems with consciousness is that there's no outward signs of consciousness, right? Well,
we kind of assume there are.
We assume there are. We think there
but
are.
That's one of the things I'm questioning.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you can, I imagine, the way you set it up in your book, it's almost as if there's sort of 4 categories, right? There's behaviors that seem conscious, behaviors that don't seem conscious, and then there's the reality of consciousness and the reality of not being conscious. So you can have locked-in syndrome, where you are having a full experience, but you can't move any part of your body, so you don't seem to be conscious. On the other hand, things that we assume are not conscious can perform basically all of the behaviors that we can. Right? Computers can speak now. I heard an AI simulation of Jordan Peterson's voice recently on Twitter that was absolutely indistinguishable from the real thing.
I'd like to hear that, yeah.
And I don't presume that there was a consciousness behind the program that made that audio. So every permutation of behavior and consciousness is possible. And once you admit that, it seems like we actually have to find a theory that tells us which objects are conscious and which objects aren't, because we can't just trust our intuitions.
Right. Yeah.
So, do you have a candidate for that theory? How do you think about, if we were to build a robot made of silicon that behaved in many ways like a human?
Yeah. No, I mean, we can.
How would would you think
not
about
that far away? Yeah.
How would you think about determining
So,
whether it was
I
conscious?
mean, the short answer to whether I have a theory is no. And I think it's possible we won't be able to ever know the answer to this question. However, I think there are many questions that we haven't been asking enough, and I think we haven't been creative enough in our exploration.
Mic check.
Which objects are conscious and which objects aren't, because we can't just trust our intuitions.
Right. Yeah.
So, do you have a candidate for that theory? How do you think about, if we were to build a robot made of silicon that behaved in many ways like a human?
Yeah. No, I mean, we can